Well, good evening, everyone. Welcome to the pre-show to the actual show. Don't nobody get too worked up quite yet, because this isn't the real show yet. That starts in 3 minutes. 3 minutes after the top of the hour, like we announce every night. So welcome to the show. I'm going to do my best to keep up tonight. I was gone for the weekend. We had a lot of fun. A little tired up and down, but that took a little bit more of the Mickey out of me. And today was a pretty low ebbed day, health-wise. So just this stupid chest thing, and everybody's got it. Rainy's got it. She doesn't feel well either. It's not COVID. I think we're out of those woods. So it's just there. So pretty low profile today, and was debating, should I do a show tonight? But of course I want to do my show tonight. So, hey, Grumpy Stack. Good to see you, Field Guy. You missed the Sunday long stream. We didn't have a stream Sunday. Oh, you were going to do a long stream, huh, Field Guy? You didn't do it, huh? Big Grumpy Stack Tires. Hi, Kat. How you doing over there in Nebraska? Dave Potter, Uncle Dave. Good to see you. And we'll talk a little bit more about what we're going to do this week, and a little feedback from a debrief, if you will, from the weekend's paranormal investigations, which were pretty cool. And you have to remember, when you're doing these things, you're talking to dead people, or at least spirits that are pretending they're dead people, or it's the dead people. So it's very interesting stuff. And so we had a good time with it. Hey, Barbie D, good to see you tonight. Paige Rockwell Soiree, good to see you. We got about 50 seconds and we go live. So, hey, Carlene, good to see you tonight. And anybody else who slipped in, Steve Clark, I see you there. Good to see you. Howdy. Howdy, howdy. So everybody, welcome. We're almost ready to go live over on the network. So you all just hang in there. We'll go dark at about 15 seconds before the show starts. And then we'll do our openers. And bada boom, bada bing, there will be. So everybody, thank you for being here. Thanks for showing up. And right about now, we're going to go dark. So all of you, sit tight. Don't go away.
Intrepid radio program with Scotty Roberts. Intelligent talk.
Hey everyone, welcome to the program. Happy Monday. I had Monday in my mind and I still said Sunday. That's the way my brain's been working all day. So welcome to the program. Happy Monday. We missed on Friday. We were out because I was out of town. We did a little paranormal investigation out of town. I'll tell you a little bit about that when we're done with the intro material here. I want to thank you for coming in. This is the Intrepid radio program. That's my program right here. Those of you over in the chat room, if I haven't said hello to you already, it's not because I didn't want to. It's because I've now gone live. We do as much of that as we can in the pre-show, and we'll hit you up at the end of the show again tonight. So welcome to everybody who's over here. I appreciate the fact that you would take your time to come in and spend it with me for an hour, looking at my mug, talking about various stuff, or listening over on the radio. That would be subspace.radio is where you can hear this show in its audio format over on the radio station. You can find the show also over on my Facebook page, as well as the Intrepid Radio Facebook page, Subspace Radio Facebook page, and a couple of other places, I think, over there. And you can catch it on my YouTube channel. That's the video simulcast of this show. And sometimes we have pretty pictures that we throw up. Other times you're just watching me talk. And the best part about the YouTube channel is that you can go over there and you can join the premier chat room for this show. And that is over at youtube.com/Scotty Roberts. Now you'll have to bear with my voice tonight. Just like last Wednesday, I've still got that. There's my non-existent cough button that I didn't reach for. As if on cue. We've still all got this crud at my house. And so it's got to slow down a bit. And the weekend was okay. That probably just being tired after that also didn't do me much good today. So still just slightly under the weather. We'll be regaining ground with this pretty quickly, I think. I don't think what I have is fatal. Let's put it that way. It's just a cold. And relapses because everybody in the house gets it, then it travels around and spins around for a while. So a germy house, you could say. And so bear with my voice tonight. We'll go as long as it'll hold up. There may not be much of a captain's cabin tonight. We may just say hello afterwards, and that's about it. We'll see how that goes. I'm not going to spend much time, as I have done lately. When I've been a little under the weather, it's just hard to do that 2 hours of radio a night. So welcome to everybody who's here. Now, I hope you're all doing well. I hope you're not all getting mowed over by the politics that are going on out there. I hope not everybody is getting too worried about all the stuff that's going on with foreign affairs in the world right now. Russia, China aligning with Russia. I know we're seeing a lot of stuff about COVID and all the stuff that everybody was censored for on public media. And now we're finding out that that stuff is actually the truth about it. And so that's going on. All the President Biden stuff, the Hunter Biden stuff. Why is it important that Hunter Biden is being investigated? You know, people like to downplay that stuff. And I know other sides do it. All sides do it. But I would hope that people are common-sensed enough to step away from your politics and take a look at what's going on. We're not going to talk politics tonight, so I'm keeping it pretty general. But you do know where I stand. You know my opinions on these things. And you know my opinions are basically the right opinions. And if I could found a party, I would found the Common Sense Party in America. And I'm really tired of the way things are going. But I hope you're hanging in there with the economy, with inflation, with I've noticed that I've been getting kicked in the butt with my taxes of late, in the last year and a half especially. It's after all this stuff, after Biden took office, after all this stuff with COVID and all the spending, all the stuff that happened in the state. And so federal seems to be working okay for me. But the state keeps trying to kick me in the jaw and send me back to the ground, and I have to keep going back. Here's one thing I'll tell you. For the last several years, I have had to, because I'm self-employed, I get asked by the state, and I've gotten a refund from the state every year of the last 4 or 5 years. And those refunds, they're not vast amounts of money. They range from, maybe $700 to $1,800, depending on the year, what the earnings were. But every year I have to jump through the same hoops. I have to show birth certificates. I have to show birth certificates for my children, all 3 of them. I have to show advertisements for my business. I have to not only demonstrate in a Schedule C and a breakdown and all of this, how much money I make, but I got to show, of course, where I spend it, where it comes in, where it gets spent on business. I have to show that my business is legit. This year, they've asked me to show my college degree or some kind of degree showing that I have the ability to work in my field. And, I was talking to one of these guys on the phone today from the state who was very polite. But I said, I've been doing this. I graduated and I was in college 43 years ago. And I said, you really want to see my degree? And I said, because I don't have one. And I never finished my college degree, never finished my master's program, even though they were tutoring me in the balance of my bachelor's. I never finished either. And so getting stuff like that, The last time I had to do this was last year, where I had to send a packet about a half-inch thick of samples of my art, samples of my design work, samples of the advertising I run, like this graphic you're looking at. It would have to be samples of this to show, hey, look over here, I do books, and that's all it is. I got to show that stuff. So it's just kind of ridiculous. And I asked the guy of the state of Wisconsin today, I said, not to be an ass or anything, but I said, do you guys keep any records from year to year? Because you asked me for the same stuff every year. I said, my kids, 13, 11, and 8, I said, they're still citizens of the country and they were still born here. But I got to prove that again. And I said, what's the purpose of that? And there's never a good answer for that. Oh, and he was very polite and very nice and very good, but there it is. So Kat says, Wyoming has no individual or corporate income tax. I need to move a mile down the road, she says, across the border. Frankly, we need to move somewhere too where there's no tax. It's starting to get ridiculous. So, yeah, they throw it away every year. That's what they do, field guy. Well, you think they'd have a note. They know how much money I make every year. Every year they could tell me how much I made last year and the year before and the year before and the year before, but they don't have any boxes checked to say children's citizen birth certificate shown, check. Doesn't show up. So anyway, all of that to say, let's push all that aside. Just going to say, I hope you're all having a very good day. I hope that things are going well for you, even in this bad economy. The economy sucks big balls right now. And it sucks for us. We don't make tons of money, but the money we do make gets spent a lot easier and a lot quicker. So I hope you're all doing okay. And everybody's commenting on that, but I want to swiftly move away from any talk of politics, any talk of taxes, any talk of all of that. And let's get into deep cleansing breath. Or as John Ward used to say, woosa, woosa. And we'd always tease him about that. So in through the nose, out through the mouth. And let's move on to our topic for tonight, which we are on the final segment of speaking about Amenhotep II. Now, I hope you've all enjoyed this little series. Those of you who might be new tonight or are hearing this topic for the first time tonight, we've spent the last 6, well, not the last 6, because we've got other topics in between, but we've now spent 6 episodes on Amenhotep II, who I believe was the pharaoh of the Exodus, and history bears that out very well. And we finally gotten to the crux of it. The end of it, we're going to be talking tonight on Hatshepsut, who I've spoken about before, and you've heard me talk about almost all of these things before, because it was part of my book about these people. It was part of topics we've talked about before, but at the same time, this is putting a little more meat on the bones, digging in a little deeper historically to really solidify the facts that I've been presenting on this. So, you might ask, why is this important to me? Why you, the listener, me, the listener, why should this be important? Why do I want to listen to this stuff? I think it's important because it establishes, number one, history. And I think history is important. We cannot forget history. We cannot wipe out history. We have to look to history to understand our past and to move forward. I think if you are at all inclined theologically or religiously, and part of any one of the Abrahamic religions, Judaism, Muslim, Christianity, all of this stuff is important to understand the history of what those books teach. This stuff isn't just fairy tales. Some might say some of these events are fairy tales. The parting of the Red Sea, did that really happen? The 10 plagues, did that really happen? Did Moses turn his staff into a serpent and the serpent ate the staffs of the Egyptians? We don't know that for sure. But you know what we do know? Is that the closer you get to understanding the history and verifying that these things happened precisely the way the biblical accounts, the scriptural accounts talk about them, I think that opens the door and lends credence to the faith story or the more fantastical elements of the story. Just because we live in a day and age where we have secularized our spiritualities and secular thinking has overtaken spiritual thinking, doesn't mean that spirituality has diminished, or that spiritual elements or the paranormal, if you will, or the supernatural has diminished. None of that has happened. It's not diminished. It's only diminished if you close the door to it and you don't experience it and you don't look to let it take hold and experience itself in you. Same with this last weekend in Illinois. We went down, I thought it was Iowa at first because my hotel was in Davenport, Iowa. And we did this paranormal investigation at the old YMCA building built in 1912, right across the river from Davenport in Rock Island, Illinois. And so that's where we were. We're going to talk about that more on Friday. I want to give you some viewpoints. I also want to talk to you about ghosts. I mentioned it in a post. I said, I start to tend to think I've got a theory built up around ghosts that we encounter and the way it fits into theology. And there were some people interested in hearing about that. So that's what we're going to kind of hit on Friday. If I'm lucky, we may get a guest on Friday that was with us. I'm going to put out a couple of feelers, which I haven't done yet. If you're listening from the weekend from this Friday, you're the one I'm going to be talking to. So who was participating with us. And we'll get a good take. I will say this. Encountered some things. Some of you here, I know Anita Palmer, I see her. And a couple of you, no Village People, Sarah, sorry. And we didn't even sing it once, but I did the hand signals. MCA, But we did have some very interesting encounters at this place and lots of stories that back them up. And I tend to, if you watched any of the live videos, that was the great experiment. We broadcast just parts of the investigation live and let the audience participate in that. And that was pretty good. It wasn't like some of the things I've seen online where it's like, hey, join us for our live broadcast of this live stream, and you see people sitting around a room. We didn't do that. It was pretty much run at a very fast pace, at a high clip. We had a command center, and everything was routed through everything. Jim Johnson, J.V. Johnson, who was the publisher of Taps Paramag when I was the editor-in-chief there. This was his thing, and he's running it. And it was like clockwork. It was very well done, I believe, from the inside. And so we didn't take lots of time in certain places, but we did get to see a lot of interesting things going on. And I'll tell you more about that on Friday. So get your butts prepped for that. But for now, I want to get into talking about Amenhotep II. And you all know, either from having read my book on the topic, the one I wrote with John Ward, The Exodus Reality, you know where I stand on the Exodus. You know that I think it was this guy, Senenmut, this bust I have back here, Hatshepsut, her stepson, Amenhotep, or Thutmose III. She was co-regent with him, and his son, Amenhotep II, would have been the pharaoh of the Exodus. The dating system works. We covered that in the first several episodes of this little series. The dating system you can bring back to one rock-solid verse in the Old Testament, 1 Kings chapter 6, verse 1, that says, and in the 480th year from the Exodus out of Egypt, Solomon dedicated the temple in Jerusalem, which is Temple 1. And we know Temple 1 was founded in the second year of Solomon's reign. And that would have been, there's a specific date on that. That date would have been 966 BCE. It even gives the month, it gives the day, and so on. You can date that back 480 years, end up with 1446 BCE as the date of the Exodus. even down to the very day. It took place in April. And when we believe that you cannot plug actual dates and actual history into these events, it belies a belief that you don't think they're real events. Really, if you can't put a date to it or real people to it, or there's no way to find it archaeologically or historically, it must not really have happened. But when you start plugging in those dates and finding that all of this stuff is efficacious, the history is solid, whether you choose to believe the faith story wrapped around it, the history that you find of these events is rock solid. So 1446, and you can look to the chronology of the Egyptian kings, and you really end up with Amenhotep II as the pharaoh of the Exodus. So what I want to look at tonight, this final segment on Amenhotep II, is Amenhotep II and the desecration of Hatshepsut's images. Now, I've talked about this before. Remember Hatshepsut? I believe she was the pharaoh's daughter, mentioned in the book of Exodus, not by name, but by that title, the title, Pharaoh's daughter. Hatshepsut Matkare was her pre-regnal name. She was Pharaoh's daughter. That was her title. She had a sister, but that was her title. And she, the Pharaoh's daughter, she found Moses, I believe, between the ages of 7 and 10 years old when she was a little girl. She sent him back to his mother, as the biblical account says, until he was old enough to come to her. She was old enough to take him. And then she took him in. And then we have Hatshepsut, who had this man named Senenmut, the guy sitting over my shoulder here. Senenmut was the man that she named, rose to great power, gave him 92 royal titles. He was about 7 to 10 years younger than she was. There's lots of detail about that story that I won't get into tonight because we've covered it before. But Senenmut, his name means mother's brother. I, your mother, am elevating you to the status of brother to the gods with me. And she gave him, like I say, 92 royal titles. She gave him the title, the hereditary crown prince of Egypt. She gave him the title, the grand royal architect. She gave him a title, the high priest of Amun. She gave him the title of grand vizier, 1 foot off the throne. And so again, pardon my cough tonight. But all of that is a little background to, after her death, well, Senenmut disappears about the time he was about 40. He just disappears off the Egyptian scene. And that's about the same time the Bible talks about Moses having turned, when he was around 40, he killed the Egyptian taskmaster, buried him in the sand. He was found out and he ran and left Egypt and was gone for 40 years, became a sheikh in the desert, and God calls him through the burning bush when he's about 80 to go back to Egypt. And we all know these stories. So Hatshepsut was the queen who was on the throne, and it was about the same time she died as the time he disappears. So I'm thinking there might have been some correlation. That's a little speculative material on my part. There's a correlation, the factions and so on. And her stepson, Thutmose III, takes over as pharaoh near 29, 30 years old. By the time he actually takes the throne, he's a co-regent with Hatshepsut his whole life. He is the head of all her armies, the general of all her armies. There was never a coup. There was never anything but a peaceful reign for Hatshepsut. And then he takes his rightful place. And it's thought that he destroyed all her images. The images on her temple, Deir el-Bahre, at Djeser Djeseru, in Luxor, Egypt. And I've been there and I've seen the images of Hatshepsut. You see the outline of her, and they're chiseled out artistically, all these things, and statues of her broken and so on. But Egyptian history itself might confirm that Amenhotep II was the Exodus pharaoh. It just, and when I say might, I mean does. It just might, all by itself, confirm this. The Thutmosid succession entered into this extraordinary phase at the death of Thutmose II, who was Hatshepsut's brother and husband, as the throne was given first to his son, Thutmose III, who was 3-4 years old at the time, and later assumed by his widow, his sister, Hatshepsut. Her rise to power resulted from her position as the child king's regent, and given his youthfulness, her self-appointment to the rank of co-regent probably met little or no opposition within the royal court. There doesn't seem to be any recorded. And sometime between year 2 and 4 of Thutmose III, this child, Hatshepsut assumed full royal titulary, and she made herself the female pharaoh of equal rank. You should read a book, The Woman Who Became the Woman Who Would Be King, and it was written by Kara Cooney. You've seen her if you watched any Egyptian documentaries on TV. She's been in a lot of those over the years. She's an Egyptologist. We had her, John Warden and I had her on this show when he and I were doing Intrepid Radio back 2013 or 14 was when she wrote that book. And it's a great book about her. So one of the first things let's do, identifying Moses' adoptive mother. Now, Moses evidently was born during the reign of Thutmose I, whose daughter, Matkare, who later became known as Hatshepsut, her regnal name, qualifies as a legitimate candidate for the pharaoh's daughter who drew Moses from the river Nile. And she was old enough during her father's second regnal year, most likely the time in which Moses was born, to qualify as his Egyptian stepmother. That's a question. Was she? So the first thing I'm going to look at, Hatshepsut's age viewed as being insufficient to play this role. Now, one scenario may preclude Hatshepsut from being the princess who drew Moses from the Nile. The chief wife of Thutmose III, first Queen Amos, was called the king's sister, but never the king's daughter, a title given only to a princess. Now, Egyptians generally were not reserved about recording ranks and titles, so this reticence may indicate that Amos was not a pharaoh's daughter, and thus was neither the daughter nor the sister of Amenhotep I. Instead, she may have been the sister or the half-sister of Thutmose I. Now, if this were true, a brother-sister marriage almost certainly would have occurred after Thutmose I was promoted to heir apparent. And as incestuous marriages are extremely rare outside of the immediate royal family, and such political matches that consolidated a would-be successor's claim to the throne were standard procedure in ancient Egypt. And perhaps then Hatshepsut was born after Thutmose I was coronated, which was in 1529 BCE, and thus was barely over 12 years old when she married her half-brother, Thutmose II, in 1516. Now, this means that Hatshepsut would have been less than 3 years of age at the time of Moses' birth, at which age she hardly could have ventured down to the Nile, let alone draw out an infant-bearing reed basket from the river, which is what the story tells us. So she was too young in that view. Second point is Hatshepsut's age viewed as being sufficient. There's no proof that Hatshepsut was born after her father's ascension. And the current lack of attestation to Queen Amos being a queen's daughter does not preclude her from being the daughter of Amenhotep I. In addition, the uncertainty about when Thutmose II's reign began, that would have been Hatshepsut's brother, means that he may have served as co-regent with his father, Thutmose I, for several years before he ruled alone. Now, Hatshepsut thus would have been of sufficient age to draw Moses out of the Nile during her father's second regnal year. So she remains a legitimate candidate for Moses' Egyptian adoptive mother, especially since her father was already over 35 years old when he assumed the throne. All right? Now, Hatshepsut, she has a sister. thinking Star Wars, and I can't do voices because of my own voice tonight. But Hatshepsut's sister, Amenhotep is a candidate. So is Hatshepsut the only candidate for Moses' royal adoptive mother? Confusion exists over the number of children actually born to Thutmose I and Queen Amos, and only 2 daughters, Hatshepsut and her sister, Princess Amenhotep, were known to have been born to the royal couple. However, Princess Amenhotep died in infancy, so she can't qualify as the candidate for the princess who found Moses, leaving Hatshepsut as the only known daughter of Thutmose I, who does qualify to fit the pharaoh's daughter in the biblical story. Now, the next point is that Hatshepsut's potential stepsister could be a candidate. One other option exists for Moses' adoptive mother, but not through Queen Amos. Thutmose I had a secondary wife, or the harem wives, named Queen Mutnefret, and the mother of Thutmose II. Now, little is known of her, but that she was a person of rank, probably even royal blood, as an inscription at Karnak calls her the king's daughter. But Mutnefret, and not Amos, actually appears in the king's mortuary chapel alongside the royal princes Ramos and Wajmos, and most of whom probably died before their father. Therefore, perhaps even numerous princes were born before their father married Amos. No princesses are known to have been mothered by Mutnefret, but the possibility does exist. So if Mutnefret did bear a daughter, undoubtedly this princess, given the ages of the princes, would have been old enough to qualify. So there's that possibility. We're looking at all angles on this. Now, Hatshepsut's position as the most likely candidate in my book is this. All of the evidence points to Hatshepsut as the most likely candidate for Moses' stepmother for several reasons. 1, Hatshepsut's blood sister, Princess Amenhotep, was the only other daughter whom Queen Amos is known to have borne. But her death in infancy eliminates her candidacy. 2, Lady Mutnefret bore several sons to Thutmose I before she died, but there's no indication that she ever bore him any daughters. 3, the text of Exodus 2:10 in the Bible states that after the child, Moses, grew, she, his mother, brought him to Pharaoh's daughter, and he became her son. Therefore, Moses' Egyptian stepmother obviously lived a considerable length of time after she retrieved him from the Nile, increasing the likelihood that an account of this daughter of Pharaoh would be documented and preserved somewhere in the Egyptians' detailed records, a qualification true of Hatshepsut alone. Nobody else had those qualifications. Now, I've got to tell you, when it comes to Senenmut, this guy, who Hatshepsut raised to great power, all the Egyptian record says of him is that he was born to commoners. Use your imagination a little bit. Born to slaves, born to indentured servants, born to common people who worked for the Pharaoh. Was he Egyptian? Was he not Egyptian? There's a book out there, Moses the Egyptian. I believe the Israelites, even at this point, were Egyptian. They had a heritage that brought them back to Canaan, to what we now know as the land of Israel, or eventually before that in politics was Palestine. But Moses would have been born to somebody who was not royal. The daughter of Pharaoh found him in the basket in the Nile. And I've talked about this before, but I think this is important to bring this up again. People would say, those who scoff at this story or skeptics of it, would say that, Oh, well, Moses being put in a basket on the River Nile. Well, that's just like the story of Osiris, and so on and so on and so on. And I said, and so they try to blow off the story saying, oh, it's just a copycat of that story. And I said, have you stopped to consider that perhaps Moses' own flesh and blood mother, do you ever stop to think that having been in Egypt, living as outcasts, and you're not even outcasts, if there's a slave culture, a servant culture, but they have been for several hundred years now, their family clan living in Egypt. Do you think she might know the story of Osiris? And do you think knowing where the palace was on the canal, the royal canal outside in northern Egypt, outside of Memphis, Mennefer, do you think she knew where the princess bathed? I think everybody knew these things. It was no big secret. But I think what she may have done was latch on to the mythology of the Egyptians, which she might have believed herself at that point, and put Moses in the basket because it resembled the story of Osiris. That was an intentional thing, I believe. And that's why the Pharaoh's daughter drew him from the Nile. But she was too young to keep him. So she sent him back with her mother, as the scripture says, and a few years later brings him back, and he becomes the son of the daughter of Pharaoh. So now we've got to identify the defacer of Hatshepsut's images. So by the way, if you didn't catch it, I think that it's determined and it's settled that Hatshepsut was indeed the Pharaoh's daughter by title. Pharaoh's daughter was a title in Egypt, who found Moses in the Nile. Or as the movies show you, it didn't. I don't think it happened that way. It says that his mother put him in a basket and placed him amongst the reeds on the banks of the Nile near where she was bathing. So, and then left his sister there, his older sister Miriam, to watch, to make sure the baby would be okay until Pharaoh's daughter found him. So, let's identify the defacer of Hatshepsut's images. At some indeterminable time after Hatshepsut's death, there was a serious attempt made to obliterate all her record from history. Wipe her out from history. Now, many inscribed cartouches of her were erased, scraped off of walls, erasure. While her busts were smashed, they were broken into pieces, and perhaps by gangs of workmen dispatched to various sites throughout Egypt. And in some cases, the culprits carefully and completely hacked out the silhouette of her image from carvings, even leaving a distinct Hatshepsut-shaped iconic image in the middle of a scene, often as a preliminary step to replacing it with a different image of royal cartouche, usually that of Thutmose I or the second or even the third. And at Karnak, her obelisks were walled up. You can go there today. The one obelisk that's still standing has a wall built all around it. And they built a wall up about 15 to 20 feet tall to cover up the obelisk without tearing it down. And so in some cases, the culprits carefully hacked out all the images. And at Karnak, her obelisks were walled up and incorporated into the vestibule in front of Pylon 5. And while at Jesher-Jesheru, her statues and sphinxes were removed, smashed, cast into trash pits, which have been found, by the way. So Thutmose III, as the defacer of Hatshepsut's image, is one possibility here. Now remember, Thutmose III is the son of Hatshepsut's brother husband, Thutmose II, who died very young, leaving an heir, and the only heir he had was his son from a lesser wife or a harem wife, and that son was Thutmose III. He became the next pharaoh, but was too young to rule, 3, 4, 5 years old at most. And so Hatshepsut stood in as a co-regent and then took over as pharaoh for some 20 plus years. So According to most Egyptologists, this massive effort to destroy all record of Hatshepsut's existence was launched by Thutmose III with a predictive motive. Out of sexist pride, he attempted to eliminate every trace of this dreaded female pharaoh rule, intending to rewrite Egyptian history to portray a smooth succession of male rulers from Thutmose I to Thutmose II, his father, to himself, Thutmose III. Wounded male pride may also have played a part of his decision to act. The mighty warrior king may have balked at being recorded for posterity as the man who ruled for 20 years under the thumb of a mere woman. So said one of these scholars. But was Thutmose III actually the perpetrator of the smashing of her images and her? Did he seethe with hatred and resentment toward his former co-ruler before viciously attacking all remnants of her after her death? That's the big question. Are cavalier accusations of sexism justifiable? And the theory that Thutmose III was the culprit behind this vicious crime is severely weakened by several factors. One, if Thutmose III did deface her image, it would be inconsistent with how he otherwise related to her memory. A scene on the dismantled Chapelle Rouge at Djeser portrays Hatshepsut and identifies her as the good god, lady of the two lands, daughter of Ra, Hatshepsut. Now, Thutmose III, who's pictured as steering his bark toward Deir el-Bahre, her temple, actually completed the Chapelle Rouge. And he added the topmost register of decorations in his own name, then claimed the shrine as his own. Also, Hatshepsut's name is still preserved in her Montu temple at Armant, which Thutmose III enlarged. And such preservation of her handiwork and further construction of her building projects would be extremely unlikely if he truly despised Hatshepsut that much and so greatly. And furthermore, Thutmose III planned the construction of his own temple to Amun called Djeser Achnet, which was said to be built at Deir el-Bahre, directly south of Djeser. When you stand at Hatshepsut's temple today, when you're on the ramps and you look just to the south, beneath the cliffs, there is the temple of Thutmose III. It's there now. You can visit it. And it includes these massive terraces and her own temple next to the one that Thutmose III subsequently built. And this construction site is inexplicable if he felt such overwhelming sexist hatred toward her. And you'd think if he was the general of all her armies up in Memphis, he'd have done something else about that over the ensuing 20 plus years until he was 29 or 30 when he finally took the throne. So, two, if Thutmose III was the culprit, pardon my cough, I'm scratching up my throat pretty well tonight, but we're still going. If Thutmose III was the culprit, he waited at least 20 years after she left office before whimsically desecrating her image. And by the way, not leaving office, she died. He could not have accomplished the feat before his 42nd regnal year, a full 20 years after Hatshepsut was dead. Thutmose III's construction projects at Karnak, which include the Hall of Annals, whose texts were written no earlier than year 42 of his reign, inadvertently concealed a few inscriptions and illustrations related to Hatshepsut, and the scenes were in place by year 42. Yet show no signs whatsoever of any desecration. And conversely, those parts of the scenes that were unprotected by his post-year 42 construction were defaced during the anti-Hatshepsut campaign. It seems impossible that he would wait until year 20 of his own reign after she had left office to initiate a campaign of anti-feminism out of personal hatred. And again, these scholars will say, while it's possible to imagine and even sympathize with Thutmose III indulging in a sudden whim of hatred against his stepmother immediately after her death, it's far harder to imagine him overcome by such a whim some 20 years after. Moreover, this whim clearly would have been a schizophrenic one, given Thutmose III's recent positive disposition toward his stepmother Hatshepsut, as displayed by his completion of her projects at Jeshurun, which is Deir el-Bahri there in Luxor. I've been there a few times. Absolutely love going there. I went there for sunrise to watch the sunrise in the distance over the Nile, straight out the east from the ramps to her temple. Gorgeous place. 3, if Thutmose III was the culprit of defacing her images, he must have had sufficient motive to attempt to prevent her from living eternally. And according to Egyptian religion, removing the name or the image of a deceased person was a direct assault on his or her spirit. For him to live forever in the field of reeds, his body, image, or name must survive on earth. And if all memory of him were lost or destroyed, the spirit too would perish, initiating the much dreaded second death, a total obliteration from which there would be no return. And this act against Hatshepsut was an attempt to condemn her to oblivion, a fate worse than death for an Egyptian. Thus, the extermination of Hatshepsut's images from the earth was indeed a drastic step. The removal of her spirit from its perpetual existence in the afterlife. Such reprisal seems far too severe to fit the motive of mere sexism. Now, if Thutmose III was the culprit, why were there also attacks against the name and monuments of Senenmut, that guy right there, her Grand Vizier, her royal architect, her priest of Amun, her hereditary crown prince of Egypt that she named? If the destruction of her images, her statues, her inscriptions, all of her imagery was solely as hatred toward her, why were sentiments also destroyed? He was the chief advisor of Hatshepsut. He disappeared from the record in years 16 to 20 of Hatshepsut's reign. And occasionally his name was violated while his image remained intact. But some of his statues were smashed, literally thrown out of temples. As I've mentioned before, they found 9 of his statues buried in a pit in Luxor recently being the last 20 or so years. And so this attack upon her male chief advisor's image can hardly be justified if Thutmose III was motivated purely by this act of sexism and hatred toward Hatshepsut. So other options are offered to justify this extreme act committed by Thutmose III. One, he wanted to atone for the offense of a female pharaoh against Mot, justice and truth, a word used to describe the continuity in the universe that derived from all the approval of all the gods. 2, the unorthodox co-regency might have cast serious doubt on the legitimacy of his own right to rule. So he wanted to ensure both the legitimacy of his reign and his legacy, which I have heard was probably one of the most realistic reasons he did any at all. He wiped off her image off a couple of places to establish I am now the pharaoh in my own right and left off. Didn't do any more of that. And certainly he did not learn of the compromise that Hatshepsut's reign was to the state of Mot only after he was an aged king, likewise after 20 years of his sole rule, and his reign was secure and his successful campaigning already had solidified him for a lasting legacy. So defiling her image would not in any conceivable way further legitimize his reign. So Amenhotep II as the defacer of Hatshepsut's image. No Egyptologist has answered satisfactorily the nagging question of who was responsible for the widespread campaign to obliterate Hatshepsut's image from the Egyptian annals, and what possible motive there could have been for such a severe act of rage, since the responsible person carried out the act only after year 42 of Thutmose III. The desecration occurred no earlier than 1464 BCE. And it's also difficult to envision that the culprit lived long after both Hatshepsut and her memory disappeared from the earth. Since the movement of time, the existence of motive are inversely proportionate. Accordingly, two possible scenarios exist that could incriminate Amenhotep II. I'm going to give you those. We've got plenty of time. We've got about 8 minutes left on the radio. And pardon my copious amounts of coughing and bodily phlegm that's coming up, but it's what I've been dealing with all day. And the more I talk, the more I irritate it. So there it is. All right, here we go. There's two possible scenarios. One, Amenhotep II, the man we've been talking about, the son of Thutmose III. He contributed to the campaign to destroy Hatshepsut's image, but he was not the initial perpetrator. A scholar named Tidsley, he observes that it's perhaps not too fanciful a leap of the imagination to suggest that Thutmose III, having started the persecution relatively late in the reign, may have died before it was concluded, and his son and his successor, Amenhotep II, with no personal involvement in the campaign, may have been content to allow the vendetta to lapse. The scholar doesn't explain why Amenhotep II would continue this campaign without personal involvement. It's believed that Amenhotep II himself completed the desecration of the female king's monuments. And two, that Amenhotep II was the sole culprit in the campaign to destroy Hatshepsut's images. The responsible individual likely possessed pharaonic authority and one legitimate Moses for Amenhotep II to have committed this act, as if Hatshepsut raised Moses as her own son in the royal court after the Red Sea incident, the loss of his armies. Amenhotep II would have returned to Egypt seething with anger, both at the loss of his firstborn son and virtually his entire army, which we talked about last time. So he would have had just cause to erase her memory from Egypt and remove her spirit from the afterlife. The Egyptian people would have supported this edict, since their rage undoubtedly rivaled the pharaohs, as they were mourning deceased family members in almost every household. Nationwide experience of loss would account for the unified effort throughout Egypt to fulfill this defeated pharaoh's commission vigorously. And so a precedent even exists for Amenhotep II's destruction of her monuments early in his reign. At Karnak temples in Luxor, Hatshepsut left the 8th pylon and a new southern gateway to the temple precinct. Ironically, evidence of Hatshepsut's building effort is today absolutely invisible, since the face of the pylon was erased and redecorated the first years of Amenhotep II. Perhaps year 9 was when it all began. And so the goal of all of this was to synchronize Israelite and Egyptian history and to examine the life of the Egyptian monarch, Amenhotep II, who corresponds chronologically to the biography of the exodus-pharaoh, in order to determine whether the historical figure, who turned out to be Amenhotep II, meets all of those requirements. Thus, it's possible now to answer all those questions posed. Does Amenhotep II qualify as the pharaoh who lived through the 10th plague because he was not his father's eldest son? Yes, he does. Records show that Amenemnet was the eldest son of Thutmose III. allowing Amenhotep II to have lived through the 10th plague. Could the eldest son of Amenhotep II have died during the 10th plague, which must be true of the Exodus-pharaoh's son? Yes, the eldest son of Amenhotep II could have died at that point. In fact, none of Amenhotep II's sons claimed to be his firstborn, and one prominent Egyptologist theorizes that the eldest son died inexplicably during childhood. Did Amenhotep II die in the Red Sea, as the Bible allegedly indicates about the Exodus pharaoh? No, because the Bible doesn't say that. He died in typical fashion, and his mummified body is still preserved. Yet, despite popular belief, this conclusion does not conflict with the biblical account, since no biblical text actually states that the Exodus pharaoh died there with his army. So can any of Amenhotep II's military campaigns be related to the Exodus events? Yes. His second Asiatic campaign, which we only lightly touched on the other day, coincides extremely well with the Exodus events. And many of the details related to it, the Pharaoh's post-Exodus future, cannot be explained without these connections. Can the loss of an exorbitant number of Hebrew slaves, potentially Egypt's slave base at the time, be accounted for the records of Amenhotep II's reign? Yes. The loss of an exceedingly large number of Israelite slaves can be accounted for by Amenhotep II's acquisition of 101,128 slaves in Canaan during his second Asiatic campaign after the Exodus, the only such campaign of its era, which was launched in late fall and took so many captives. Is there any evidence to confirm that Amenhotep II interacted with the Hebrews after they left Egypt? Yes. Amenhotep II captured 3,600 Apiru, they were called, Hebrews, during his second campaign, which was launched just under 7 months after the Exodus. So despite many futile attempts to disprove the association of the Hebrews with the Apiru of the New Kingdom, far more evidence exists for there being one and the same. And if Amenhotep II is the Exodus pharaoh, could the obliteration of Hatshepsut's image from many Egyptian monuments and inscriptions be attributed to the backlash from the Exodus event? Yes. Hers and Senenmut's. It's unquestionable. The Israelite Exodus would have taken place in Amenhotep's year 9, and it corresponds to the absolute date of 1446 BCE, April 2nd. And that would be the date for this event. And all of those of you listening on radio, I got to tell you, we got to get out of here. We got it right up to the bitter end. Everybody else sit tight. Live long and prosper, radio.
Join us every weeknight at 9 p.m. Central Standard Time, 10 p.m. Eastern. The Intrepid radio program, a Scotty Roberts Productions broadcast.
Well, and welcome to the captain's cabin, y'all. Now, do you see why this topic is so passionate for me? Here, I'm going to take off the banner, which I should have done during the break, because we're no longer in Intrepid Radio. We're done. But you see this is a topic I've studied for so many years, and it's become passionate for me. I enjoy it. I enjoy the history of it. I enjoy the fact that it's common sense and it makes sense when you put it all together. So I hope that you too enjoyed all of this as we went through it. And that's it for Amenhotep II. We're not going to talk about him anymore after tonight. I have a totally different topic on Wednesday. And now, as much as I hate to say it, I'm not going to stick around. I have no voice left. And, well, I can still talk, but it's just getting worse and worse as the night goes on. You can hear it. And so I'm going to call it quits for tonight. Knock on wood. We'll be back on Wednesday. And Wednesday we'll be able to do a captain's cabin and maybe a little further conversation. So I appreciate the fact that you're all here. We're going to talk this Friday about the paranormal investigation we had over the weekend and some of the people that we encountered there, and living and dead, and just some really interesting facts. Something I didn't know and understand was that even in a place like Davenport, Iowa, and just a bridge in the Mississippi River separating it from Rock Island, Illinois, was a big place for mobsters. And there was one man in particular that we encountered there based on the stories of him. And I was with psychic medium, and she's a PhD in other areas. I think she said health medicine or health or something like that of some kind. A medical intuitive is what she is. But she also is very, I don't even know the right words to use. I'll put it all together and tell you what I think of her. But you may know her. Dr. Rebecca Foster was there with J.V. Johnson and I, and Rob. Sorry, Rob, if you're listening, I don't remember your last name, who has worked with Rebecca Foster before. And we had the four of us, and then the two sons of one of Rebecca, one of James, who were working our tech and our cameras. And so it was a good time. And I will tell you more about her take. If we're lucky, we'll get one of them to come on Friday and talk about it a little bit more. Thank you, Blackberry Brandy, Anita Palmer. I'll give that a try, except I don't have any here. I've got other things that'll work though. And so some rest, lots of liquid, says Kat. Thank you. I'll do my best. Today I was just down and out. It was just one of those days that kids didn't have to go to school because we had ice last night. They could have gone to school. Oh my God. We went to school and 10 times worse than this when I was a kid. But they called it off. Wake up call at 5 a.m. from the school superintendent, a recorded message that school would be 2 hours late. And then another call around 7 saying that, well, school's been canceled completely for today. And it was a gorgeous day all day today. Sunshine. It was wet outside because the sun was shining, and a lot of stuff melted off. But there you go. I think there will be school tomorrow. So thank you, Paige, and everybody else. I really appreciate it. Bronchitis is going around, says Sean Stroik. Mine is more, what Rainey and I have is more sinus. It's up in our head, and it affects my chest and my throat, and a lot of coughing and wheezing and sneezing and gunk. So hopefully we'll get over that pretty soon. Rum that throat, says Uncle Dave. Yeah, I should. I think I've got some rum here. So there you go. We'll aim toward Friday, our ghost day, to talk about this last weekend's event. And I got something else going on Wednesday for this show. And so, Elderberry, thank you. I will get well. I will do my best. Every day it seemed to be getting better and better. And then, one thing about this event, now the place we were, the old YMCA building, 4 stories. You've seen pictures of it if you saw my Facebook posts. Neat old building built about 110, 111 years ago, and in 1912. And it was a YMCA where guys stayed there on I believe, the second, third, and fourth floors, little rooms. And there was mob activity that took place there, apparently prostitution rings running out of there. At one point, eventually, it was all shut down, and the mob boss of the day was arrested. And I think he did some prison time. And we actually spoke to him, or depending on what you believe, something that impersonated him. And this was through Dr. Foster, and she connected with him. We brought cigars and whiskey for him, and so it was an interesting time. But the building on the main floor is all a furniture store, and furniture store run since the mid-90s, I think, by this woman and her family. And pretty neat little place. And that was the floor where there was warm air. The rest of the building was cold, and it was cold all weekend. So we were freezing all weekend. But and that probably contributed to this getting worse. And it only sounds worse now because I've been talking for an hour. So we'll do a little debrief for you on Friday. So thanks, everybody, for coming. Thanks for being here for the show. I appreciate it. Something I didn't say at the beginning, which I usually do. If you're not subscribed to my YouTube channel, hit the subscribe button. Click the little bell. You'll get notifications. And if you want to hit the little join button, it'll show you 3 ways you can become a member of this channel. And it's for $1 a month, $5 a month, or $15 a month. And that helps you help me keep the lights on. So I appreciate it. If you haven't liked the show, like it. Helps our algorithms. And boy, that's about all I got for tonight. I appreciate you all. I appreciate the fact that you'd be here, that you support me. And I love it. And again, just so you know, we're going to be doing a little reorganizing. We're in the midst of that and relaunching this whole effort. And that'll be coming up in the near future. So as for now, we're going to quit this, and it's going to be the same thing from now. We're not making any changes till the change gets made. And we'll let you know what's going on when it happens. It'll be a big celebration. And until then, you know what? I want all of you to have a good night. And get out of here, and we'll see you again here Wednesday night. I appreciate everything you do and all your time. So you know what? Live long and prosper.